Great leaders don't avoid conflict. They use it as a catalyst for insight, alignment, and innovation. My guest today is Matthew Abrams, author of Inviting Genius: How Good Leaders Use Conflict to Become Great. After working with more than 80 companies and leading over 600 leadership sessions, Matthew has seen what separates teams that grow from teams that stall. We're going to get into why the best leadership teams argue more, what most companies get wrong about psychological safety, and how to turn disagreement into trust, clarity, and real results. Matthew, welcome to Win-Win Leadership.
Karen, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Matthew, let's talk about something that's important to both of us. I'm very excited to talk about conflict today. I've been talking about emotional intelligence most of my career, which is probably the foundation, you might call it, for successful conflict resolution. So I really value your insights, and I look forward to hearing more about your expertise today. So your new book, Inviting Genius, why does this book matter so much?
Where to start? I would say it was the book, or it is the book that I wish I had when I started my first business, because I was not competent or confident in conflict. And to be honest, that's why my business failed. And subsequently, as you mentioned, I've worked with countless leaders, and I've seen in these leadership teams great people, great strategy, great vision, but they often struggle when it comes to having hard conversations, when they're dealing with tension and they're really trying to navigate and transcend that tension into innovation and creativity and deeper connection. So I just see it, and especially with the advent of AI, we're relying more and more on artificial intelligence. The relational intelligence becomes even more important. So I like to see teams flourish, and teams will only flourish if their relationships are open and honest and transparent.
For sure. And, I talk about in my book, Win-Win Leadership, the importance of having those difficult conversations, because most people do not love conflict.
True.
Right?
True.
So you said the best teams argue more. Very interesting concept. So what are they doing different from teams that avoid it?
Well, it's important to qualify. It's not just arguing. What I talk about in Inviting Genius is a concept of productive conflict, where we're not just having conflict for conflict's sake. That actually does happen, and that is not helpful. So it's not just arguing, it's the kind of quality of the argument. What I usually see is kind of two ends of this continuum. One end is the argue more, where we're spending a lot of our time in processing and upsetting relationships and then repairing relationships. And that's obviously not terribly effective. And then on the other side of the continuum is being polite, not saying the hard things, wanting to preserve the relationships. So when it comes to arguing more, what we really need is more productive conflict, where people are truth-telling. They're saying what's on their heart. They're saying what's on their mind, and they're doing it in a way that's actually received and ideally embraced by the rest of their team.
And when I started the conversation with you, I said, Matthew, let's talk about something important to both of us. So in my book, I have a chapter on having difficult conversations. And one important step, in my opinion, is to start out on neutral ground. So when did you first realize conflict wasn't really the problem, but it's the skill gap around it?
Yeah, well, this again goes back to my personal experience in dealing, or better yet, not dealing with conflict. And I think it was actually exactly what you said. I didn't have the confidence and the skill set required to navigate this. And honestly, I don't see most of us learning productive conflict, in school or in business school or anywhere for that matter. Most of the time, what we learn is what has been modeled for us. And most of the time, that is about being right. It is about preserving our rightness. It's about being what we define as a leader. And oftentimes that doesn't equate to saying, I made a mistake. I need your help with something. I'm not really sure what to do here. So it started with me. And then as time went on and I started working with other leaders and leadership teams, I started noticing that was a pattern, pretty prolific throughout most of the leadership teams I work with. They are not able to say the hard things to the people that need to hear the hard thing when they need to hear the hard thing, and do that in a compassionate way.
Mm-hmm. You made an excellent point. Oftentimes, conflict resolution is not discussed in business education programs. So coming from higher ed, that was something I made sure to put into my leadership development class. And I used the book, Joseph Greeney and some other authors, Crucial Conversations. You read that book?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great one.
Yeah. So I would have them read that and go from there. But what does conflict fluency actually look like in a room?
Yeah, so conflict fluency is a term that I came up with that really just speaks to our ability, just like a language, right? We can be competent in a language, but not fluent in a language. So we can very conscientiously go through the steps of productive conflict, which is way better than having destructive conflict or no conflict at all. But conflict fluency is when we get to that point where, say, you and I see things differently, and we just say, hey, Karen, I know you're seeing it this way. It makes a lot of sense that you're seeing it this way. I see it differently. Can we talk about this? And that's it. It's just really unconsciously competent when it comes to seeing things differently and having hard conversations. It's not that we ever get to not be uncomfortable. It's just that we normalize that discomfort and we enter the danger and have hard conversations. And we just know that that's an essential part of us realizing our fullest potential, both as leaders and as a team.
I love the point you just made, hearing both sides. Because, oftentimes we think we're right and we want to make our point. We want to be heard. But it's so much richer when you actually let the other person, maybe even let the other person go first and hear their point of view and perspective. And it may end up at the end of the day creating an even better solution than either one of you anticipated. So I love the point that you make of hearing both sides and sticking to the facts.
And even being curious about the other person. And like you said, starting there and saying, okay, tell me more. What are you seeing here? Without even bringing up, hey, I see it differently. I think you're wrong. It really becomes a disarming approach when we can start with curiosity.
Yeah. Tell us about the importance of listening, and not just listening to respond, but actually listening to understand the other party.
Well, it does so many things. The first thing is, it really, like you said, beginning with an emotionally neutral place, it really creates the conditions for the other person, enables them to get whatever it is off their chest. And just in that very process, depressurizes the conflict coming right out of the gate. And that's really what we're trying to do, because our brain's default is to protect ourselves. Right. So when we can start by being curious and listening to really understand, it helps the other person feel like they matter, like their perspective is valid, like we care about that relationship. And when we can start there, we keep the amygdala in our brain, which is just ready to protect ourselves. We keep that at bay, and we allow for the neocortex to really engage. And the person, when we start by listening to understand, the other person feels respected and cared for. And when they feel respected and cared for, that's where creativity comes in. And that's ultimately where the best ideas and accountability come in, when people feel like they were heard and they were valued.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very well said. Very well said. What's the cost of a team that prioritizes harmony, or some may call it keeping the peace, over honesty?
Kind of the best case scenario when we're keeping the peace or prioritizing and protecting the relationship is everybody is showing up and doing their part. Mm-hmm. And I do see this, unfortunately, quite frequently. We have a group of leaders. We don't have a leadership team. So we are thinking, we meaning individuals on that team, we are thinking things that are different than the direction we're potentially going in the decision that we're getting ready to make. We are keeping our feelings and our emotions to ourselves, and decisions will get made. The decision train will leave the station, but we will not be on that train. So that is probably the most significant consequence when we are being nice, when we are protecting the relationships, is a decision is made. I don't really agree with that decision. And then when it comes time to be accountable for delivering on my part of that decision, I'm not prioritizing it because in my mind, I said, okay, well, so-and-so is going to just do this, whatever, this path, whether I think it's a good idea or not, it's not worth it. And then when it comes time for me to deliver, I'm going to just be like, well, I was working on what I thought was most important.
Why do you think it's so hard for people to just be honest?
It's such a great question, Karen. I think it goes back to, a million years ago. Like I said, there are so many things at play under the surface. I think it's something like 95, 97% of our actions are subconsciously motivated. So the biggest subconscious motivator is to be accepted, right? It used to be like our life was really reliant on our ability to be accepted as part of the group or the tribe. And when we say, I see it differently, even though it's like not a rational thing where, the leaders on the team might say like, of course we want to hear that. There's some part of us that says, well, I'm risking not being accepted. And when there's a power dynamic at play, that's just amplified, and the risk can be unfortunately very real. Sometimes if I'm speaking truth to my boss and my boss is not of the mindset that she or he wants to really hear the truth, then my job can be at risk. My reputation can be at risk. The opportunities for development and advancement can be at risk. So those are, we really, as leaders, we need to create the conditions for people to use their voice. And it really requires a lot of work. It's not as simple as a declaration saying, we need everybody to speak up. That rarely works.
Right. That's very well said. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel like I was hearing in that we need to help people build their confidence in knowing that it's safe to be able to speak up and share and tell the truth. And, sometimes we may even need to define, quote, truth. You don't always, sometimes it's having the emotional intelligence to maybe not say too much or not too blunt, but it is about being honest and trying to share different viewpoints, which kind of leads us to a term that you talk about, psychological safety. What do you think most company and or people are misunderstanding about psychological safety?
So Amy Edmondson's work has been really foundational, as I'm sure you know, in this kind of creating these conditions for people to feel heard and respected and cared for and brought into the conversation. It's often, I find, misunderstood and misinterpreted in that when we say psychological safety, I mean, you just think back on like the last 7 years, psychological safety, I believe, is like, we want everyone to feel safe, right? We want everyone to feel safe. And when you can feel safe, then you can speak your mind, you can speak your heart. But one of two things happens often when it's not, I believe, like ingested with the intention that Amy Edmondson had. One is we have psychological safety. We just say that, right? We want everyone to feel safe, but we don't have the tools and mechanisms in place, and we don't have the track record to demonstrate that. So while we are saying we want everyone to feel safe, rarely do we ever feel safe. It is not about feeling safe. I think people misconstrue that to feel like, well, I need to feel like I can say anything and it will be just, totally kumbaya. And when it's not, inevitably, then we're like, well, this isn't psychologically safe. So one is we need to kind of restory the concept of psychological safety. And that goes back to it is going to be uncomfortable. We are not trying to get to a place. And that's where I think the word safety can be a little misleading. we need to feel courageous enough to say what we need to say and know that it will be accepted and know that rough draft language. I always tell my clients, rough draft language is okay. We are going to work through this and massage this out together. So that's one, is we need to know that it's not about feeling 100% safe to say what you need to say. It's about normalizing the discomfort. And two is we can say we want psychological safety, and we can even practice saying the thing to the person at the right time. But if we don't have the tools to navigate that discomfort, it quickly becomes destructive conflict. And when it becomes destructive conflict, guess what happens to the psychological safety?
It
goes out the door. Exactly. So it's a great starting place, but we need to really understand, what does that mean? What does that look like in practice? If we're going to say something that is dissenting of the majority, what does it mean for us to feel courageous enough to speak up? Because when we inevitably fail in that without having the tools, it becomes a very unsafe place. And especially when we're saying it's safe and we're not acting safely or courageously, that's often the worst cocktail for unhealthy teams.
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head, talking about getting outside of being comfortable and having the courage to be able to do it. And how do leaders help their employees or their teams build that courage and confidence to be able to speak up? And, at the end of the day, you may have to agree to disagree. That's okay. Right.
That's great.
How do you create the environment where it's okay to disagree, but at least everyone has been heard? Maybe elaborate on that a little.
Yeah, you just nailed it. We are not looking for consensus. Consensus is a productivity killer. What we're looking for is commitment. And people, to get to a place of commitment, people need to feel valued. They need to feel genuinely heard, like their perspective matters. So your question, how do we do that? How do leaders create the conditions to enable people on their team to feel heard? Well, it actually starts with them first. They need to model it. They need to provoke dissent. So instead of a leader saying, okay, here's the plan, here's what it looks like, here's the ROI, is everybody on board? What's going to happen is, like, most people in even a somewhat healthy team are going to be like, yeah, sure. So what the leader needs to do is to kind of maybe put an idea out there and then say, what's wrong with this idea? What are the gaps that I'm not seeing that you're seeing? So just a very simple, nuanced way of how they're presenting an idea is one method. Another method is they go last. They ask good questions and they stay in a genuine place of curiosity and say, okay. They have their ideas. They have their probably preconceived understanding of what the right path is, but they just put that on the shelf. And this is the thing, they genuinely need to put it on the shelf. And then they need to ask questions. And then someone says, well, I think we should go in this direction. And the leader might be saying, well, I don't think so. But instead of saying, I don't think so, they're saying, help me understand why. Where are you coming from? What are the different components that are leading you to think that? And then the leader very well may have this beginner mindset where they say, I never thought of it that way. And then they can even be transparent and say, you know what, going into this conversation, I was pretty set on going in this direction, but you each had different ideas and perspectives that you brought to my attention that I totally changed my mind on that. And I'm really grateful. So it's really about practicing that curiosity. And when they do that, and then in another component is if someone else on their team says, hey, I disagree, this is such a great opportunity for leaders to say, they have two choices, right? It could be like reactive. Well, you're not taking into consideration, blah, blah, blah. And you immediately get into a conflict and more of a combative me versus you zero-sum game. So when they can say, great, tell me more, that is just modeling what they want to see in everybody else. So the first step is they, as the leader, need to model what it is they want to see in their teams.
Yeah, so the leader needs to have courage and model the courage. We talked about the teams having courage to speak up and be honest. The leader needs to be courageous enough to allow it and then model that behavior. That's very well said. And also, I think that incorporates the idea we just talked about of listening, not just to be heard, but to understand. Because when you listen to just, react, then you create more conflict. But when you're actually listening to understand, it helps open up that creativity and innovation you're talking about.
That's right. And we, like, as leaders, and so many of the leaders that I've seen, were acculturated to be right and to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, that we might need to ask better questions, goes against the very identity of what we were taught to be, that is to be a leader. So there's a lot of deprogramming that needs to happen, why this isn't as easy as an academic exercise to say, oh yeah, I should ask more questions. When the rubber hits the road, like, we have that impulse as leaders to, and sometimes we feel like we have to, like, why am I a leader? I'm a leader because I have the answers, right? But so we need to really kind of flip the script on that and say, I'm a leader because I create the conditions that deliver results. And then how do I do that most effectively?
Yes, very well said. How does a leader know if their team feels safe or just polite?
Sometimes that's very obvious, because we're looking at kind of, again, two ends of that continuum. One is polite and the other is like personal attacks or unproductive conflict. So obviously, I think it's pretty clear to see, if we have this unproductive conflict where we're like dreading our meetings because we know there's so-and-so's going to say that, and then they're going to get into it with this person. Sales is going to push the numbers and ops is going to, say, we can't do that. Like that's one, like that's the very obvious one. But the polite is the one that is really the silent friction creator. We as leaders can really practice emotional intelligence. Sometimes we have someone on the team that we know is a default truth teller. And we ask them one-on-one, hey, your honest feedback is a real gift to me. I really respect it. Where am I? And it's often like, where am I? That's the question that I encourage leaders to say, is like, where am I creating friction? What is being said that I am not hearing? So we often just need to mine in that and be curious about that. The other is, if you as a leader notice that people aren't being accountable for what it is they're saying they're going to do, it's likely because they weren't committed to the decision when the decision was made. So you need to go upstream and see, are the voices at the table really getting heard? Are they really getting valued? So I would look at, if you have low accountability, it's very likely you have politeness underneath the surface.
You just mentioned two interesting things. One was another point about listening to what's not being heard or what's not being said. Sometimes there's a lot there that you may be missing. So having someone who is a truth teller to help you with that blind spot, that was beautifully said. And second, you talk about accountability, and leaders should actually follow through and do what they say they're going to do. Or maybe it's not just the leader, it's whatever the team consensus does end up being, and you move forward. How does the team and or the leader set up accountability steps to make sure that the decision follow through and execution does indeed happen?
Yeah. So it's again, so much of leadership is about creating conditions. So there are, beyond the scope of inviting genius, a lot of the work that I do with leadership teams is teach them an operating system and how to get what they want from their business. So one of those components is really clear roles that they ultimately each seat is accountable for, tying metrics, weekly metrics to that seat that determines success. So just like daily activities. And then when it comes to actual initiatives, we need to have deadlines and we need to have open and transparent communication. So the leader needs to be really clear on what they want to see from her or his team, and they need to communicate that clarity. It sounds so obvious, right? But it really happens not that common. So I need to be able to be very clear if we have a project and we get, I'm the leader and I facilitate this conversation. I genuinely make sure all the voices are heard and we're committed. Maybe not everybody's, believes, like you said, it's the right idea, but we get to a place of commitment, disagree and commit, or agree and commit. So that's the first step. And then I need to be really clear on what does success look like? And I need to communicate that and make sure that everybody has what they need. Tools, resources, my time and attention, clarity on what success looks like, etc. And I need to make sure we're on the same page with that. And then only once we're on the same page and we have clear milestones of deliverables and deadlines tied to those milestones, if we don't have that clarity and we don't have that commitment, we're kind of operating in a felt sense, an emotional sense of like, well, my understanding of what success looked like was this. And then the other person's like, well, I thought it would look like this. And it's not because that person didn't want to deliver. It's because I, as the leader, wasn't clear enough in what success looked like and transparent in that clarity.
That is huge, the way that you communicate. And in my book, I talk about DISC behavioral profiles. Are you familiar with DISCs in general?
Sure. Yeah.
So the way that the leader communicates with each of the team members, or the way that it's described and how we're going to move forward, deliver a result or follow through, whatever the case may be, the way that the leader communicates that with the different individuals, because not everyone hears it the same way or takes it in the same way or understands it the same way. So what are some tools leaders can use similar to DISC to be able to help communicate better?
Sure. Well, DISC is a great one. I often use Kobe. I also use 6 Working Geniuses. So any of these profiles are really great in helping each of us as individuals understand our cognitive and affective kind of traits so we can understand ourselves better. That's a huge part of any leader is self-awareness, right? And then we have team awareness. So if I know I'm a high D, right, then I need to be aware of the impact that a high D has on my team. And I need to maybe make more time for listening and reflection and making sure we're on the same page. If I'm in looking at, I don't want to go too into the talk that we would probably love to have it were just you and I, but if I were a high fact finder and I needed someone with a high quick start to really be methodical in what they're doing, and this is Kobe that we're talking about here, I would just need to know that I'm a high fact finder. I want a lot of information, but we need to ship on this initiative. Yeah. So I need to give myself a deadline and say, okay, I know that I need a week to come up with the different information, and then I need you to push me, to ship something, because I know my tendency will stay in this analysis phase for way too long.
Yeah. I think we could probably converse on that for the rest of the afternoon.
Totally.
Yeah, I always tell my clients it's a good idea. I work with DISC, but it's a good idea to get multiple different self-assessments, because the more you learn about your style, and they all teach you something different about you, it helps you grow as a leader. One
of the things that we're developing right now is a conflict profile. So understanding how are we in relationship to conflict? How does conflict show up for me? What are the ideal conditions for me? How do I feel it in my body? Do I have confidence to speak up? If I don't, what do I need? What are the conditions that my team can create that will make it more likely that I'll use my voice? So we have an individual conflict profile and a team conflict profile assessment. So specifically when it comes to having these harder conversations and truth telling, how do we as a team optimize the conditions for each of us to use our voice?
I love that. I would love to see that if you wouldn't mind sharing that at some point. I talk about in my book, I have a reflection at the end of my difficult conversations chapter where I ask questions to kind of self-reflect on what is your tendency or default style in trying to resolve conflict, whether you're a conflict avoider or you compromise, collaborate, etc. So I would love to see your work there.
Yeah, well, happy to share that.
So let's change gears just a little bit. So you've worked with founders from idea to scale. Why do so many companies stall after early success?
I would say the most significant condition is as companies start to scale, complexity increases. So complexity of what we're doing and complexity of relationships, and specifically the complexity of relationships. So as we start a company, maybe there's a handful of us, we're kind of all doing everything, right? And then we continue to grow until we really clarify those roles. And then we begin to delegate certain things. We resemble a little league, like fourth grade baseball team where the ball is hit and everybody moves in this direction to get the ball. So that's one, but also from a relational perspective, when that is happening, we feel like, oh, you're kind of stepping on my toes, but we don't have the competency and confidence to have those harder conversations. And as we continue to grow, the complexity doesn't only kind of grow commensurate to the size, it compounds. So our ability to communicate effectively with one another is the channel that we need to work on opening and allowing information to flow through those channels. And if you think about like a adolescent, when they go through puberty, their body already knows, right? They know how to grow. We might have growing pains, but the body is designed over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to grow organically. You don't need to stretch out the arms or anything like that. But when it comes to teams, that doesn't happen organically. So we need to be able to communicate effectively. We need to understand what our needs are and communicate those needs and generate that clarity individually and relationally throughout our team. And when we can do that effectively, as we continue to grow, we continue to reorganize both individually as a leader and systemically as a team and as a company. So that often is not something that is a linear left brain kind of thing, right? Where we set goals for the year and we set a strategy to achieve those goals. Those are so important. But what we don't really learn is what's often called the softer skills, the relational fluency of how do I communicate effectively? How do we communicate effectively so that we can move the information and self-awareness and collective awareness in a way that is going to create the conditions for us to grow individually and as an organization.
And those growing pains are often what leads to the most beautiful transformations.
Exactly.
But a lot of people, they're afraid to go through the pain, or they don't want to go through the pain. So they avoid conflict. What role does conflict avoidance play in the stall?
It plays every role in the stall. I mean, because what conflict is just an indicator. Something's out of alignment. Either something's out of alignment within myself or something's out of alignment in our relationship. So if I'm not addressing that, I'm suppressing that. It is like a balloon that if you grab it in a certain area, it's going to come out in another area. It's not something that is just going to disappear. And often that will compound. So when we're not in touch with, hey, I'm out of alignment, and being curious about that lack of alignment, we fall out of congruence. And when we fall out of congruence, it often has nefarious, more subterranean effects, right? I'm going to talk about this person to you at the water cooler, not to that person. And then we're trying to grow on top of that. And we have a weak foundation relationally. And ultimately, things break. And that's so avoidable. But so many of us don't know how to do it and don't prioritize it because of exactly what you said. We prioritize being safe. We prioritize being right. We prioritize being in the realm that we know because that's more comfortable. That's more familiar. But like you said, for true innovation, for true growth, we need to get into our uncomfortable spaces in our own self-awareness and sense of identity and in our relationship.
Sure. And trying to stay in the comfort zone and, quote, keeping the peace often leads to a lot more chaos. So having the conversations and not avoiding the conflict often leads to great alignment and resolution.
Yeah. And what I always tell my clients, always choose short-term pain.
Yes.
We want long-term gain. So we're going to be faced with the short-term pain opportunity every day. Choose it every time. It will always be way easier. And most of the time when it comes to relational conflict, something that we think is a brick wall and we're just like, oh, I don't want to have this conversation. When we are very thoughtful and intentional about it, we bring it up in a thoughtful way and we realize it's not a brick wall. It's just tissue paper. And then we move on. And then next time, guess what? It becomes that much easier. Right. And that goes back to the creating psychological safety. That's how we build it. We have productive conflict where we respect the task and the relationship at once. And when we do that time and time again, we build a bigger reservoir of confidence to get uncomfortable with each other.
100%. 100%. What's one conversation most leadership teams are avoiding right now?
How am I implicit in creating a lack of health in this team? Each of us as leaders are really resistant to entering that danger in a direct way that threatens our identity. Mm-hmm. So much of leadership and evolving as a leader is about evolving as an identity. And the identity is the thing that grounds us and gives us confidence. So it's easier, I wouldn't say easy, but it's easier to talk about strategy and why you think this strategy should be this way. And I think that this strategy should be another way. But when it comes to those deeper concepts of my beliefs and my identity, we often avoid those, or I see a lot of leaders avoiding those. So when I notice this, I often invite the leaders to ask the other leaders, what am I doing that is limiting your potential? How am I creating friction for you? How am I creating friction for the team? And when they can ask that question from a genuine place of curiosity and the people on the team feel courageous enough to be honest and not be, not kind of say something that is true, but not the real thing. When they can do that and say the real thing, I see these leadership teams unlock the next level in their development. So really, the conversations that need to be had that aren't being had to the degree that I would say they should be had is about my identity as a leader and how am I creating friction for you and for this team.
So you're talking about the leader wanting to handle conflict and get better at it. Where do they start? If they want to start tomorrow, what are two things they can do to get started?
They can start today, actually. They can look back into the past and just think about a conflict that they had. And the more emotional and resistant the conflict, the more nuggets there are in that, because those more entrenched conflicts are really indicators that something significant is out of alignment. So looking at taking a past conflict and saying, what was the need that I had in that conflict that wasn't being met? And really spending some time on that until you get to the real need, because what we think is the need is often a symptom. I came into that meeting and it seemed like the decision was already made and I didn't feel like you really cared about what I had to say. That's great, but you just took it a layer deeper. Now we need to go another layer deeper and understand what is the real need. And we all have needs, and a lot of us have needs that are unmet. We're just not in touch with this. So the need in that situation is a need for respect and recognition, perhaps. So looking back and understanding what were the needs that we had, and maybe even what were the needs that this other person may have had that weren't being met. So that's one we could start immediately. The thing that we can start tomorrow is looking at a potential conflict. Now, we don't always have the opportunity for premeditated conflict where we can go in and say, I have to have the hard conversation. But oftentimes we do. We know we're going to have the hard conversation. So I talk about this process called the peace process in the book. And like you said in the beginning, the first thing we need to do is emotionally neutralize the relationship. So we need to let the other person know that we're with them, we're for them, we're in this together. It's not me versus you. It's you and me versus the conflict. So the P stands for pursue alignment. So how do we get on the same page where we're standing shoulder to shoulder against the conflict? And then the second step is think about the E is extract the facts. So what are the facts? What actually happened that made me upset? So I need to get in touch with that. And then the A is assess the story and emotions. So as these facts happened, I created a story in my mind that may or may not be true, but it is a real story for me, right? And that story created certain emotions for me that created the conflict that made me, that is why I'm feeling upset, because I'm feeling embarrassed or I'm feeling angry or I'm feeling disrespected, whatever it is. But those are the emotions that are really important. So I'm thinking through those. And then I share all of these things. And then the C is compassionately spar. So this is where we're honoring the relationship and the task. So we need to say, hey, it's really important that we're delivering this project on time, but I also understand that this is creating stress for you and your team. I have a need to deliver quality to this client. I have a need to deliver in a timely fashion because I have a lot of pride in my work and it's really core to who I am. And I know that that's important to you too. What are you seeing that I'm not seeing? So that's where we're really in this dance together. The last step is the expressing of the needs. So once I've really been heard and that person's really been heard, I say, well, I have a need to do this. And I make a request that if you would meet that need, meet that request, my need would be met. So that is and then we need to make sure the other person's needs are met too. But when we can do all that, this is founded and adopted from Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication, right? So this is really just making sure that I'm owning my experience and not doing an analysis on you and you think this and you never let me, because that immediately will derail the conflict, right?
Oh, sure.
So I'm clear on what my story is and what my needs are, and then I'm taking responsibility for that, and we're working through that together. So that is what I have found to be the most productive way to level up our conflict game. And then we move to that degree of like conscious competence, where we're not quite fluent in conflict, but we're competent in conflict. And then we do that a handful of times and it becomes second nature. And then we get conflict fluency.
Yeah, I love that acronym. And I love the point that you made about trying to find the facts and the logic. And the more you focus on that and take out the emotion, the more likely you are to help get those stories in other people's minds to come to facts and start taking out that emotional reaction to it. And then another great point you just made, if you go into a difficult conversation saying you did this or you did that, or that's
right.
Already put someone on. Yeah, everyone's already on the defensive. So going in with that neutral ground of let's talk about something that's important to us, and then sticking with I statements for taking responsibility for your own part in it is huge. So very well said there. And let's think of a scenario. Assuming the leaders went through some tools, they've done some training, they go in and try to have this difficult conversation with their team. And for whatever reason, it turns into a big disagreement. How can they, what's some kind of structure? And maybe it's going back to the acronym you just used on peace. What structure can they use to turn that disagreement into a productive conversation in the heat of the moment?
Yeah, well, the most important thing that anyone can do in the heat of the moment is to slow things down. And this goes back to our brain's tendency to go into fight, flight, or follow, right? So when we slow things down by even just taking a couple breaths or just saying, time out, this is going off the rails. I really want this to be productive. We take a breath and we say, like, can we do a redo? And when we do that, we are effectively bringing the neocortex back online and saying, are you willing to continue, or do you need something right now? And then just waiting, again, slowing things down. And if they say, I'm okay, we can keep going, then we go back to pursuing alignment. All right, let's remember, we both want X, right? So and then really echoing and validating is really slow down, echo and validate. What I'm hearing is you feel uncomfortable with this timeline. What I'm hearing is this is going to put undue pressure on your team. What I'm hearing is validate. That makes total sense to me. I really get it. Can we figure out a way where my need is X and your need is Y, that we can move forward and really honor both of our needs here? So it is, and oftentimes, like you were saying, why it goes off the rails is because we move into that analysis. We move into the attack language because the neocortex is no longer online and the amygdala is kicked in. So we're just trying to be safe in that moment. So return to safety and then continue to go slowly. And we do that by echoing and validating, which honors the relationship. And then we need to bring the task back as well, because we can't stay in honoring the relationship without the task, because then we go back to politeness. We're like, okay, sure, we'll just do it that way. We'll just do it your way. And then I start to lose my voice, and that's not okay. So we need to make sure both voices are in the mix.
Yeah, slowing it down. In my book, I call it the power of the pause. Sometimes you just need to pause, breathe, take a moment. Maybe it's, in the conversation for the day, get some good sleep and collect your thoughts, let your emotions pass, and you start in the next morning when everyone's refreshed. But whatever the time frame is, there's a lot of power in that pause for all parties to collect their thoughts and come back together more productive.
100%. And the only thing that I 100% agree, the power of the pause, I love that, is make sure there's a commitment to coming back to the table with a timeline. Can we put something in the calendar for tomorrow? How long do you need? 24 hours. Great. Are you available at 10 a.m.? I'll come to your office. We'll go for a walk, whatever. So just making sure you're tying it down, because remember, we don't want to have that conversation. The tendency is like, whatever. It's not that big of a deal. Let's just move on with things. But that's when we have this subterranean dysfunction that will inevitably compound.
And once you have come to a solution and resolution to this conflict, how do leaders and or teams make sure that everyone's held accountable and the follow through actually happens?
Yeah. So that's why the making a request is so important. So I'm making a request to have my needs met, and the other person says, yes, I agree to that request. That's a commitment right there. So if that commitment is breached, we need to come back and say something like, when we had this conversation, you committed to involving me in any meetings with X client in the kickoff phase. And that didn't happen. And that needs to happen. Are you still able to make that commitment, or is there something that has changed? Because I still have that need, and that need needs to be met. So it doesn't need to be a huge, we committed to this. Like, we're humans, we're going to make mistakes. And I tell my clients, like, inevitably, when we make these agreements, they are agreements that we're aspiring to, and we will veer off sometimes, but we're making a commitment to come back and to do the right thing when that happens. So we just need to be really clear. And sometimes we just echo that agreement that was made at the time that it's made. So moving forward, what I'm hearing is you're making a commitment to involve me in said meetings moving forward. Is that right? And they say yes. And that's it. And then we need to honor that, because if that's not being honored, then we're not having the real conversation in the first place.
You make a great point that sometimes you have to go back and ask, because people are not perfect, and I'm certainly not perfect. And then also the environment shifts, and we have to shift and adapt and change with it. So there's no one best way that works forever. There's no one win-win leadership outcome. It shifts and adapts, and you have to continually work at it all the time with all the parties involved. So excellent point there. And what are some last words of wisdom that you could leave with our listeners today?
Well, just knowing that it is really not natural and it is not easy to get started to lean into uncomfortable conversations. And that if you're avoiding them or diluting them, it just makes you normal. And you would be surprised how relatively easy it is when you have a methodology to have hard conversations, and then you will do it once and it won't go perfectly. And that's okay. And you will get better at it, and you will get better at it. And I just, like, my passionate plea for all of your listeners is that when we can have hard conversations really thoughtfully, where we're honoring the person and the task, we will have greater connection and deeper relationships, whether that's people on your team or a child or a spouse. It's just something that we have historically avoided from culturally and physiologically. Like, the cards are stacked against us. But when we can flip the script and say, you know what, I'm going to try. It's amazing how many times I see it with leadership teams and people in general, and me with my wife and my kid, just to go slow and to be in touch with my needs and my emotions and my story. And you start to see that this becomes normalized. And this goes back to Amy Edmondson and her concept of psychological safety, because then we have psychological courage. And with psychological courage, our relationships will just go so much farther, so much faster, and it will feel so much better. So I would just say, practice. It's not about perfection. It's about progress. But every one of us are capable of improving. And with that improvement, we notice tremendous rewards.
Yeah, psychological courage. I love that term you just said. And you made another excellent point about all the things we've discussed today. These same tools can work in personal life. So thank you for sharing that personal note there. Hey, Matthew, how can our listeners find out more about you and your book?
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah. Go to invitinggenius.com. You will find out more about the book, more about me and the work that we're doing. And like you, we have a pre-order campaign going on right now. The book is going to be launched on August 4th, but you can pre-order the book right now on anywhere books are sold.
Wow, congratulations. A very exciting moment for you. So
Thank you. You too.
Highly recommend you all go and get Matthew's new book. Go to that pre-order, and I can't wait for the big launch for you. That's exciting. And Matthew, thank you so much for being with us today. I really enjoyed talking with you. I feel like we could probably keep talking for several more hours, but hopefully a follow-up at some point.
I would love that, Karen. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you.